Welcome to the Fredericton Heritage Trust Speaker Series. We're pleased this afternoon to have Walter Rooney speak to us. And many of us remember Walter very well, and for some I'm sure it's going to be a first time. For those that know him well, he was the Playhouse in Fredericton. As a Newfoundlander, he brought to the Playhouse that Newfoundland, that sense of humor, that enthusiasm, and it made its mark on this city. Before he went to the Playhouse, he actually had one claim to fame in his biography, and that is that somewhere in his life he managed to be the ring bearer for gorgeous George the wrestler. How he ended up doing that, I have no idea, but he gave that up, came to UNB to study business. He quickly gave that up, studied philosophy, got a degree, went to Australia to work on his PhD in philosophy, then he went to Memorial to teach for a while, and then in 1968 he appears at the Playhouse. And he's there for 10 years, and that's where he made his mark. From there, he moved to Ottawa to be at the Canada Council. He's also been artistic director in Vancouver, in Charlottetown. He came back, by the way, to the Playhouse in 1995, and another 4-year stint here. And therefore, if there's anybody who has a good idea of the workings of the Playhouse, it's got to be Walter Rooney. Now, there's one personal note I might add about Walter, is that Walter and I were always in combat. And it was sort of like two guys chasing a girl. He was at the Playhouse, and I was at the Art Gallery. And the Beaverbrook Canadian Foundation were funding us both. Yeah. And we both wanted them on our side. So we would actually have discussions. Who picks up who at the airport, and who delivers who back to the airport. So we got that extra pitch in for our case. Yeah. I might add that I have a feeling that Walter always won. The Playhouse always got more money than the Beaverbrook Art Gallery. Yeah. I don't fault him for that. In fact, I honor him for that. And it's a pleasure to once again say hello to Walter Rooney.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming on this lovely Sunday afternoon when you could be out golfing or all sorts of things. A couple of days ago, I bumped into somebody I hadn't seen in quite a long while, and he looked at me and said, "My God, Walter, you look like an Old Testament prophet." And I assured him, as I want to assure you, I have no prophetic skills. This is just an actor getting ready for his next gig, which is playing Kris Kringle for the 4th time at Magnus Theatre in Thunder Bay. So that's what this is about. The other thing is, some of you know, all of you may not, I'm now legally blind. I have macular, and so I can't see faces the way I used to. If I walk by, please say hello and tell me who you are. Sometimes I recognize a voice. There are those unmistakable ones like Peter Pacey. Awful enunciation, you know. What can I say? So, 50 years of the Playhouse in approximately 30 minutes. The glasses are just a prop. I'd love to know who it was who was advising Lord Beaverbrook when they put together the Beaverbrook Auditorium Act Incorporated, which you can get on the net and take a look at it, passed the legislature in 1961. Brilliant, brilliant piece. And it said that the objects of the auditorium were to foster and promote the study and public enjoyment of the arts, in particular the arts of theater and music, and any other similar related activities, and the production of works therein. And to achieve that, they were going to build a building, and to achieve that, they could accept gifts, of kind, or money, or whatever. And they made such a deal with the province. They got the land free. They got on the heating and electrical system free. No municipal tax, thank you very much, which became a bit of a burden when I was there because the city would never give me any money because they always said, you're getting no tax, that's a gift, which is in fact true. But it was a brilliant move. I was in Australia when the Playhouse opened. It was given as a gift to the people of the province of New Brunswick. And in fact, the first board outlined in that act consisted of 24 people, 4 of whom were appointed by the Lieutenant Governor and Council. And the rest, there was 1 from St. John, 1 from Fredericton, 1 from Moncton, and 1 from each county of the province. That was the board. When I came on board years later, they had cut the board down to a more reasonable size, but still had representation from around. The Playhouse opened in mid-September of 1964 with 2 gala performances, and the star was Roberta Peters from the Metropolitan Opera. Now, there are all kinds of anecdotes about the opening, but one which I love was that she didn't hit it off too well with Lady Dunn, Beaverbrook. Beaverbrook himself had died that July, I think it was. And on each night, Lady Dunn Beaverbrook got up and read a piece about the Lord Beaverbrook, which didn't please Roberta very much. So on the last night, when there was supposed to be a reception afterwards, word has it that she turned to the baritone who was with her and said, "Andiamo, darling, let's get the F out of here," and left and didn't go to the reception. But anyway, the place opened. It felt wonderful. It was an 1,100-seat auditorium. And the first general manager was a gentleman named Alexander Gray, and his secretary offsider was Doreen Grinstead, who stayed there for many, many years. There was a cleaning staff of 2. There was a maintenance man, and there were 2 people sharing a tiny box office which was in between the 2 pillars in the front foyer. And that was the staff. Alexander Gray established a company called the Company of 10, which was a community theater group. Did some productions, and of course it was a rental hall. And then Brian Swarbrick came through in 1966. And he produced the first professional summer theater, which had, some pretty good actors. Bruno Gerussi, Edwin Stevenson, Gerard Parks. And he did 2 seasons, 2 summers. And I had come back from Australia in '66, in the summer of '66, was fortunate enough to get a gig at Memorial teaching philosophy. But during the summer, I was hired by Bob Love, head of the education department at UNB, to be the director of drama for the summer season. And so I came here, and I dropped down to the Playhouse and got a little involved there, helped out a little bit. And when we finished at the university in August, myself and Alvin Shaw, my old mentor, and a couple of others, we hired the Playhouse and put on a production of Moon is Blue for about 3 days. 4 days. It cost us, I think, altogether about $3,000 to do it. And we made about 50 cents. So that was fun. I went back to Newfoundland and came back the next summer. And that was Brian's last summer. So I went back to Newfoundland. And in '68, around February, I got a call from Alvin Shaw saying, they're looking for the new general manager at the Playhouse. Are you interested? Well, here I was on the academic circuit. I could have had a great pension. I think about that all the time. So I said to Alvin, I said, look, I'm not interested in just running a building. I'd have to start a theater company. And having worked all those years in New Brunswick when I was at university with the Dominion Drama Festival, going around the province, I knew that there were auditoriums and that we could work in. And Alvin said, well, tell them that. So I came up in February and was interviewed by the board. And the board at that time consisted of Dr. Bev Jewett, Mr. D.C. Campbell, Alvin Shaw represented the university, and a wonderful, wonderful unsung hero named Jack Main from the Canadian Beaverbrook Foundation, and the Premier of the province, Louis J. Robichaud. And so I did the interview and said that this is what I would like to do, and they said, well, fine, as long as it doesn't cost us any money. So I did the first summer season in rep, 4 shows, and we made $120. On the basis of that, I approached the Beaverbrook Foundation with a plan to do 4 shows from January to May. And I had become aware of a theatre company in Montreal called Théâtre du Nouveau Monde. And they had a lovely poster with a lovely font that said TNM. And I thought, TNB. That's going to be the name. So I stole the font. Jean-Louis Roux was the artistic director at TNM. And a year or 2 later, I met him at a Canadian Conference of the Arts meeting. And I had to apologize for stealing their logo and changing the name to TNB. And he was very gracious. But I told Jack Main what I wanted to do and roughly what it would cost. And they gave us a grant, in addition to the operating grant for the building, they gave us $24,000. And so I set out in the fall of 1968. Bertha Miller, who was married to Lou Miller, the dentist, some people may remember that, she was big in the IODE. And my mother-in-law at the time was also in the IODE. And she said to me, you know, I think the IOD has some money that was tied up with Canadian players. So I went to see Bertha Miller, and sure indeed, I think they had $800 or $900 left over from when they used to sponsor the IODE. And she said she'd be willing to give that to us if we started the company. And she said, also there's a man in St. Stephen named Nicholson, who's a lawyer, and he used to head the committee that did the Canadian players down there. And he has something like $1,100. Off to St. Stephen I went. It was my first call. Went to see him, and he said, well, he wasn't quite prepared to give up the money until he saw something happen. But what I should do, he said, you want to get in touch with some of the people in the community who are, you know, the real shakers and doers, and get them on side. And I said, well, who would that be? And he said, well, we have this young lawyer named Bill Cockburn and his wife Marty. They were pretty active here, and Bill's with the Kiwanis Club. So I went up and knocked on the door. Marty came out. I told her who I was and what I wanted. She said, come in. She phoned her husband, said, come home, Bill. Bill came home. I made the pitch. And he said, you got to come down and speak to my club, which I did. And they came on side as sponsors for $1,200 a night. Ticket prices were $1.50, $2, $2.50 was the big price. So that was the start, tying up with the service clubs. And I managed to get 5, and I needed 1 more. And I went to this one community. I won't tell you where, but I went to this one community, and by now, I had the patter down pretty good. And this service club started their meetings at 5 o'clock with an open bar. And then they sat down and had dinner. And then they presented the guest speaker. So I had 1 or 2, but then came the speech. And I knew the speech by heart then. And I gave the speech, and I finished with, any questions? And a hand went up from the back of the room and said, yeah, how do we know what you're telling us is true? And I thought, oh my God. Oh. Well, yes, the Premier of the province happens to be on my board if you want to give him a call. And from the back of the room came, that big effer, who'd trust anything he'd say? It was the head of the PC organization in that community. But anyway, that group came on, and they were sponsors with us for years. So that was sort of the start of the TNB. And we kept operating the Playhouse, of course, as a rental house, and we brought in things. I had no budget initially for bringing in acts, But once again, I went to Jack Bain, and they gave me $20,000 a year. That was for that purpose. And in those days, you could get some pretty heavy-duty stuff for $5,000. I mean, I sat in that green room with Roy Orbison, Dave Brubeck, Philippe Outremer, just so many wonderful people who came. Brubeck came, and there was a big storm, and hardly anybody came. And he said afterwards, he said, you lost money on this, didn't you? I said, yeah. He said, well, I tell you what, I'll come next spring if you can get me a day fishing on the Miramichi. I said, oh, great. So I called the Premier, it was Hatfield at that time, and he called Lieutenant Governor Wallace Burt, and Brubeck came back and went fishing. And they made sure he caught something. So that was a period. I'm accused of loving the Playhouse in that building, and of course I do. I had 15 years of my life tied up in that building. And when I left in 1978, it was in pretty good shape, and Malcolm Black came in after that, doing the TMB as well as a general manager dealing with it. And it went on like that with various artistic directors for a number of years. When I came back in 1995, there was a bit of a deficit. Not a big one, but there was a deficit. But the big shocker was I was there no sooner than about a week when I was informed by the Beaverbrook Foundation. Jack Main had long since passed, and there was another person looking after it. And now the custodian was a Timothy Aiken, who was into pharmaceuticals in New York. And I was told that they were cutting the grant of $200,000. Bang. And that was devastating. So I informed Alf Madley of the Foundation of Montreal that we had to have a meeting. And Timothy Aiken came for the very first time, and we sat in the boardroom upstairs and went through this whole thing. And I said, well, if you're doing this, and I pulled out the keys and I put them on the desk, and I said, you now own a theater. And he turned to Alf Madley and he said, is that true? And Madley said, well, Tim, you are the custodian. Yes. So he went away and came back and informed us that, okay, they're only going to cut the grant by $100,000 this year, but it'll be cut by another $100,000 next year. So that created a lot of difficulties. It's pretty tough to replace that kind of money that quickly. So on we went for another couple of years, and then I went and stupidly had a mild heart thing. And I'm fine now, don't count, you know. So I left in, I think it was 99. And in 2000, the Playhouse was sold to the city, who created the Fredericton Playhouse Incorporated and took it over. Now somehow around that time, the Playhouse ended up having to put in their own mechanical system and came off the steam line and the electric line. Because when we did the big renovation in 1971, 72, again, the foundation spent a little over $2.4 million and put in the flag gallery, which had been in the original design of the building, but Lady Dunn Beaverbrook looked at it and said, what's that bump on the roof? And the architect said, well, that's a flag gallery. She said, take it off. And they took it off. Well, of course, we put it back and reduced the seating capacity from 1,100 down to 763. And Fred Lebensol, who was the architect for us, wonderful, wonderful man, did Place des Arts in Montreal, did the Vancouver Playhouse and Concert Hall, did the Confederation Center, did the Arts and Culture Center in St. John's. Just a wonderful man. When we looked at the fly tower going on that building, Fred said, oh my God, that's the elephant in the room. We can't hide it. It's there. We've got to do something with it. It has to be a public artwork. And we got Tom Forrestal in, and Tom went away and came back with 4 or 5 different designs, some which were metal, some plastic, some all kinds of designs, but nothing was quite right in terms of longevity in terms of maintenance, cost of maintenance and that. And finally, Tom was frustrated one day, and we were in the office, and he said, well, what in the name of God is it? What do you want here? And I said, well, Tom, it's like a Christmas box on Christmas morning, and you're opening up the box, and all the wonderful things that are in it are going to be revealed. He went away and he came back with the design that you see up there of the ribbons all around. And it just was beautiful. And no maintenance, because it's not, the color is solid right through the material. And one of my major concerns, if they tear down the Playhouse, is what do you do with the largest piece of public art in Canada by a renowned artist like Tom Forrestal? And also, what do you do with the other one, which is the Sidney Smith mural in the lobby, which has Beaverbrook in it, Lady Dunn Beaverbrook, Colleen Whitney Thompson is in it, and all the others are people in Fredericton that Smith met while he was here. And I'd love to see a postcard which had all the people identified. And I'd love to know what they will do with that artwork if it should come to tearing the Playhouse down. So the city gets it in 2000, and TNB moved out in 2004 as the principal tenant and established their own place up in Whiting Road. Then in 2010, they were having some trouble what to do about the building, and they brought in some local engineers who looked at it all and said, hey, you're wasting your money. And that's really 10 years ago, 7 years ago now, when they started thinking about they need a performing arts center. Now, you can say a lot of things about the Playhouse, but you can't blame it for not being a performing arts center. It was never intended to be. It was intended to be a theater. And lobby spaces weren't a big thing in those days. In Britain, they were called the crushed spaces. Lobby spaces were tiny in the West End theaters. But we did manage in the renovation to double the size. We put in the West Gallery, as well as moved the box office, increased some of the washrooms and that. But anyway, they decided early on a new performing arts center, and they talked about it being down on the park behind the City Hall, which, by the way, was one time an 810-seat opera house. Oh, I get to play in opera houses in Canada. The Theatre Orangeville is in an opera house almost identical to City Hall, and it's City Hall as well, only they built City Hall on back of the opera house. Same in Port Dover, Lighthouse Festival Theatre. They're beautiful, beautiful spaces. So maybe we should kick the city out of that building and go back to an 810-seat beautiful opera house. Oscar Wilde played in that house. Yeah, there's a great history there. The other great performance space that used to be in this town, the Opera House was there until 1940, but the other place was the Normal School, Teachers College, an 1,100-seat auditorium. I performed on that stage twice when I was a young student at the Red and Black Review. Great space. Now I understand that the Justice Building might become available in 2 years. Who knows what you could do with that space? Maybe worth investigating. But now I think the city and the board of the Fredericton Playhouse Incorporated is beginning to think that systems are breaking down. And there's a sense of urgency. And so they've come up with 2 new proposals. One which involves maintaining part or maybe some of the Playhouse, building on it to incorporate a 350-seat theater in a box office, or a black box, or taking it down and doing the full footprint of a new performing arts space that would go out into halfway out into St. John Street and go up and across maybe even build over onto the convention center. So that's what they're looking at right now. And they expect to consult between now and December and come back to the city in December. Now let me be clear, I do not disparage the intentions, the motives, or the desire to do anything ill to the board of directors of the Playhouse. I just hope that they just won't be guided by money. The first proposal was worth about 50 million. I think now they're down to 40-something million. My father, who was a plumbing and heating contractor, used to say, "How do you estimate the cost of a job?" And he said, "My son, first you takes a look at her. Then you makes a guess. Then you doubles it, adds 100, and that's about half enough." So we all know how costs escalate. So I hope that they really do due diligence. And if I had to just wave a magic wand, I would love to see the Playhouse maintained, refitted in the form that it is now. Only one thing I would do is add in $80,000 to get a Wengler acoustic shell, because that would really help music acts and symphony. That's always been a bit of a problem. And my goodness, I'd love to see something happen with the Justice Building, whether it's associated with this or not. But that space, that footprint, you could do easily a 350-seat house, a 150-seat black box, dressing rooms, rehearsal halls, offices for cultural groups on that site. It would be really, really interesting to see. So it's, I don't have a magic wand, but if I did, I'd love to see the Playhouse retained. But if it can't be, then I hope that they really do due diligence in what follows. And I hope it's at least on that site. So I think that's close to 30. So if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them. So shout and let me see your hand. Yes?
Mr. Chairman, I think you mentioned that when the fly gallery was added to the building,
Yeah.
the seating capacity went from 1,100.
1100 to 763. Yeah.
Did that seating actually go? Where was it?
Because the stage was moved ahead 40 feet. So where the orchestra pit was, right at the front of the old stage at the Playhouse, that ended up in the back. And what had been the stage became the workshop area, and above that became the rehearsal hall. One thing I should mention, Beaverbrook was really interesting. He liked to get value for his dollar. I think it's fair to say that the initial construction was done relatively on the cheap. It only cost $1 million to build that building. So it's far from the code that would be applied today if you were building from the ground up. So I think that's some of the problems are inherent in that. Yes, other? Yes.
It's Steve Patterson.
Yes, Steve.
I just wanted to add a few things that I picked up over the year about performing arts in Fredericton. I did some letter writing during the summer and got answers from both the Playhouse and the city. A few facts that you may not know. The city spends about $800,000 a year to keep the Playhouse going. Mm-hmm. $800,000 when you put it all in. They take care of all maintenance. They give a grant. The Playhouse, of course, is administered by a board that is answerable to the city. But among the questions I asked was how much more money goes to the performing arts in Fredericton. And what it appeared to me is that the performing arts in Fredericton are really decentralized. That's just the way it is. I asked specifically, for example, how much money does the city give to Memorial Hall at UNB, where there are a good many performing arts performances? And the answer was zero.
Zero.
I served for a while on the board of the Fredericton Music Festival. How often does the Fredericton Music Festival, performing arts involving local kids, use the Playhouse? And the answer is we don't use the Playhouse at all. And so it goes. We have a symphony orchestra in Fredericton now, and before that, more of a chamber orchestra that rarely, if ever, use the Playhouse. I know there's an exception coming up in the next while, but typically it doesn't. We have choirs, including a major choral society that does big works every year, and they rarely, if ever, use the Playhouse. The Playhouse is just not used by the local performing artists. And I don't think that any centralized performing arts center is going to attract them, and it makes me ask this question. Why more than an auditorium do we need a secondary performance hall within that structure? A 300-seater. We've got lots of 300-seaters around town, and maybe they're not perfect, and maybe there could be a better one. Your vision was perhaps a black box, but there's one just up the hill here, a ways that I don't think is used every day of the week. And so it goes. It seems to me that the city is imagining that the Performing Arts Center in Fredericton is going to be more than it is. And what's being planned right now is being planned by a board that is doing well what it does and wants to continue doing what it does. But that translates into encouraging the performing arts largely in the city of Fredericton? I'm not sure. I don't see how it does or can. And it makes me wonder why the city has elevated this to a priority when there are so many other things that need doing. And I'm with Mr. Pacey.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the swimming pool.
It seems to me that your ideas about the future use of the old normal school makes sense too. Maybe that's the site of a 300-seater that could form, could perform well for the users who need that kind of facility.
There's going to be, leaving aside cost of renting the place, I don't know what the structure is now, but it used to be that there was a rental charge for local nonprofit, local for-profit, national not-for-profit, and national commercial. There were different rates for those things to try to make it affordable, but as everything does, it goes up. A big thing is happening right now, which they've avoided for 50 years, and that is, it's been certified for IATSE. And that's the International Alliance of Stage Employees, and which is run still to this day, even though they're all in Canada, it's run out of New York. That's going to increase cost of operation and going to make demands. In the early days, for example, with Theatre New Brunswick, when we would tour to PEI, our lighting guy and our sound guy were not allowed to use the equipment. The IATSE guys had to come in and use the equipment, which increased the cost. Same with offloading the trucks. It had to be done by the house crew. So that's going to be an interesting thing to deal with. Yeah. Yes?
I just listening to some of the things that were on the morning show. They said, especially not last time, but the time before, they were pretty specific about the fact that this theater is not going to be a community arts center. It's going to be a presenting house. It's specifically, and the main mandate is to bring acts in from out of town, not to, and they said, they were pretty clear about that. It's not meant to be a community arts center. It's meant to be a presenting house to bring acts in from out of town.
Yeah, it's not a larger version of the Charlotte Street Center.
No, they said that right on the radio, and we're talking about local acts access and stuff, but they were quite honest about the fact it's gonna be a presenting house to bring in, mostly to bring in bigger acts from out of town.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's changed,
No,
but
I don't know.
that's what they were saying on the radio.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry to monopolize this, but
No.
you talked about cost, and if you want to get an example of cost, if you look at the current tickets being sold for TNB, there are two productions at this Playhouse, and the others are out in the sticks.
Yes.
And people say, well, they won't go to this, they won't go out there. But if it's good theatre,
They'll go.
go. And they are going. So it's very important to remember that and if you had $500,000, how much better to turn that into a foundation to fund these things. I know Thomas Morgan Jones has to scrounge around to get money because he can't.
There's a wonderful, wonderful quote by Samuel Johnson, who wrote a prologue to the opening of the Drury Lane Theatre way back in the day, which was read by David Garrick. And if I can remember, it says, "The drama's laws, the drama's patrons give, for we who live to please must please to live." Not bad advice, not bad advice.
You commented on the possible use of the Justice Building. Do you have
Yes.
anything more to say, more specific to say about that? How it could be used in conjunction with perhaps just a renovated, unchanged in footprint?
No, I don't think the footprint would need to be changed. I think there's more than enough space there. You knock down the walls and start over in there, the interior walls and start over. And I mean, when you think of how many courts are, offices, all of that in there, those could be converted to rehearsal halls, dance studios, 300 seat if you needed it, a black box if you needed it, and space for community arts groups, offices. Justice for all. And let's kick the city out of City Hall. 810 seat, beautiful opera house. Tell them, Greg, go up to Theatre Orangeville and take a look at City Hall. Thank you. Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you on behalf of Fredericton Heritage Trust.
My
Walter.
pleasure.
Walter, you're as informative as you've always been. You're as entertaining as
Get
you've
out.
always been. Now,
You're looking for money, aren't you?
you may be losing your eyesight, but you sure haven't lost your memory.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, sir. Oh, my God. Well, unfortunately, it isn't Scotch. But thank you all for coming.